Look, you can never be 100% secure, right? But if you're flying blind and you're not assessing the risk, then you're not going to know how to ask tougher questions about the cybersecurity hygiene.
Today, we're excited to welcome Dr. Aleksandr Yampolskiy, cybersecurity innovator, co-founder, and CEO of SecurityScorecard, an E&Y Entrepreneur of the Year award winner. With over 20 years in the field, he's led security at Goldman Sachs and Oracle, served as CISO at Guild Group, and scaled Blog Talk Radio to over 30 million monthly visitors. Now at the helm of SecurityScorecard, a trusted partner to half of the Fortune 100, Aleksandr is also the author of The Perfect Scorecard and holds a PhD in cryptography from Yale. In this episode, we dive into his path to building a global cybersecurity brand, his insights on leadership, risk, and innovation.
That's interesting. So you're saying that the first year you didn't really think too much about the revenue. You really focused on understanding what you're building, working with the design partners, and that to you was more important than revenue in the first year.
Well, look, revenue was important, but I wanted to build the best product we could build.
Alex, I want to start off by asking you, what keeps you up at night in relation to supply chain risk? And how did that inspire your founding vision behind SecurityScorecard?
When I was a chief security officer at Guild Group, e-commerce company in New York, one day my CFO came to my office with a signed contract of a software to help mitigate e-commerce fraud. We signed on a dotted line and we started integrating with that system. And just as we were uploading our information, we discovered unencrypted credit card data belonging to other companies. That to me was a big wake-up call that I could lose my job as a chief security officer due to circumstances outside of my control. We're all interconnected to each other. And you don't know if the documents that you send to your lawyer, to your accountant, or the information you upload to a file sharing site can get hacked and compromised. And then all of a sudden, you're in the New York Times for the wrong reasons. And so that's really what keeps me up awake at night, that we're interconnected to each other and you have zero visibility into security of your suppliers. And that really was the impetus to start SecurityScorecard.
You were right there, kind of in the right in the middle of it. You saw it happen firsthand, the light bulb moment for you. Alex, tell me, when you kind of think about SecurityScorecard as a company today, what is the biggest problem that you're solving for your customers?
So SecurityScorecard pioneered the concept of security ratings, where we help measure and quantify cyber risk for any company in the world. All you need to do is just type a name of a company, and within seconds, we're going to tell you the score correlated to likelihood of a data breach. How's that company doing compared to others? So you have three main use cases. You have 9 of the 10 banks using us to rate their suppliers, collaborate with them, make smarter, faster decisions. You have top cyber insurance underwriting companies using SecurityScorecard to decide what type of a cyber premium to charge. You have companies using our score to report to the board and benchmark themselves compared to others. So we really help companies measure what has been unmeasurable before. In the beginning of last year, we introduced an additional product called Max. And the basic idea is now we no longer just give you the security ratings, we also help you manage your entire supply chain risk. So we help you collaborate, reach out to your suppliers, and just make the whole ecosystem safer.
If I think about it, and let me know if I'm thinking of this correctly, if I unpack that, if I think of our company, if I was looking to do business with a new supplier or a vendor, it could be anyone. When I want to plug our systems together, before I do that, I come to you, and then you can tell me with your product, the security, but also the health check of what the likelihood that things can go wrong with working with this particular supplier.
That's exactly it. Because you don't know how diligent are your partners in terms of protecting your information. And this is really a big risk today. 60%, 60, of the data breaches happen due to negligence of a third party. Hackers no longer look to break into a company. They look for the weakest link. They break into somebody that you do business with, and then they use it as a jumping pot to get into your company. As an example, many people have heard of the Target data breach, Target the retailer. But in reality, what attackers did is they targeted a third-party vendor called Fazio, F-A-Z-I-O. It was a small air conditioning contractor, a Pennsylvania-based company that provided maintenance services to Target. Attackers sent a phishing email to Fazio employees And unfortunately, they fell for it. And then, as a result, what happened is once they got access to fuzzy mechanical services network, they stole the credentials and they got access to a target hosted web service dedicated to outside vendors because they were providing services to Target. So then they uploaded a file, installed a web shell, to execute commands on a hosting server. And so as a result, what happened is this breach through a vendor cost Target upwards of $200 million. It ruined the Christmas for probably every single person working in Target's IT department. And it remains one of the most infamous data breaches in cybersecurity history.
When did this happen?
This happened back in 2013, so about 12 years ago.
This is before Scorecard.
Security Scorecard got started a year later in 2014.
So let's say Target had Security Scorecard in its repository of security measures. You're saying that risk wouldn't happen?
Look, you can never be 100% bulletproof secure, right? But if you're flying blind and you're not assessing the risk of companies you do business with, then you're not going to know how to ask tougher questions about their cybersecurity hygiene. It really all starts with the set of questions that you ask. How do you verify that the company you do business with actually is going to protect your data? It's obviously not guaranteed that, if somebody had security scorecard, they would never get breached because a determined adversary, like a nation state, can always get in. But the analogy I would use is if you walk in a neighborhood and you see a broken window in a house and you see unmowed lawn, graffiti on a wall, you know that house is not taking good care of themselves. And so a lot of the time, those indications are very easily noticeable in suppliers. And so we help you collate all this analytical information.
That's amazing. And this second product, I don't know if it is the second product, but this new product, you called it, was it Max?
Yeah, it's called Max for supply chain detection and response.
Awesome. And how does that work now? Like, how does that fit into the ecosystem?
Sure. So security ratings help you measure and quantify risk, and supply chain detection and response helps you solve the problem. It helps you collaborate with the suppliers. So we extended what CrowdStrike, a security company, pioneered for XDR, extended detection response, and we extended those capabilities to be able to monitor an extended attack surface for your company and your extended suppliers. And so we give you this ability to talk to suppliers, to send them messages, to create workflow automation, to jointly mitigate and collaborate and reduce risk.
Coming to this new era of technology with AI, have you thought about how you could potentially have even further risk now? And how do you protect against the risk when AI is now involved?
Well, look, AI only makes things more complicated, but it helps both attackers and defenders. Let's talk about both parts. So for attackers, now they can use deep fakes to create AI videos that look like you and me, and you can't even tell apart. As an example, we've seen in the news recently that hackers impersonated the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and reached out to foreign ministers by creating a sophisticated deep fake. So AI makes it easy to create deep fakes, sophisticated phishing campaigns. Before, you used to have a certain level of expertise, right? You had to have a certain level of expertise to break into companies. About 10 years ago, it became a market on a dark web where you can just pay somebody $100 or $200 and hire them to do work for you. And the bar keeps going down because now you have almost like a ChatGPT technology where you could just type as a hacker and say, hey, I want to attack Firas's website. Can you give me like a very sophisticated malware? And so now all of a sudden you have easier to use interfaces that hackers use. They can scan the entire internet within seconds and minutes and look for vulnerable computers in every organization in the world, government, private. So it's much faster to collect this big data. Now, for defenders, AI also brings a set of advantages. We used to have no data before on security alerts, information. Now, we have so much data that we're drowning in it. We can't find a needle in a haystack. So AI makes it possible for you to take all these mountains of data and reduce it down to one or two actionable things that really matter. I think I'm very bullish on agentic AI. I think if we look into the future, you're going to have robots fighting robots, like defenders robots fighting hacker robots. So I see a lot of the AI as an extension of the defenders where you might be able to in the future do the job of 4 or 5 people at once.
The reason I ask that question is because when I think about the risks that now exist versus the risks the risks around security have always been there with any type of company. But with AI, it just poses more risk. One of the companies that we have in our portfolio that we work with is centered around figuring out how to solve that deep fake problem. So it's a real problem and it affects everyone, consumers and enterprise. I want to sort of tap into the product itself and kind of the mechanics around it. And I don't know how much you can share, but I'm really keen to understand how Security Scorecard quantifies and visualizes the third-party risks, the hidden third-party risks.
Sure, we have 3 steps to the process. And the first step, we collect the data all over the internet. We collect the data all over the internet, different type of signals, information that the malware might be picking in outside of the infrastructure, how quickly are the companies patching their systems. In step 2, for any company in the world, we discover its attack surface, we discover business subsidiaries, we discover all this different information. And then finally, in the third part, we benchmark the data to historical data set from 10 years. So we basically say, out of the companies that ever got hacked, how many had an A score, how many had an F score. And so we've shown together with insurance companies that companies with a bad score, they're 13 times more likely to suffer data breach than companies with a good score. So really it's a sophisticated data pipeline, but then also 10 years of history where we benchmark the likelihood of a data breach to bad and good scores. But then on top of it, we built a collaboration layer where you don't just get the data, but you get reporting, you get analytics, and you're able to engage and collaborate with your suppliers as well.
Alex, it sounds like, and I hear this a lot with a lot of different founders I work with. Data is now, and maybe has been for a long time, it's a great asset, but it's also a huge risk. And it seems like most security companies are not only cybersecurity companies, but they're really data companies.
I think that's very much true. I do like that analogy. I think that, look, AI obviously is a great thing, but I think a lot of the models, you can apply it and look, you have a race with OpenAI, with Llama, with other type of things. But I think the real moat is going to be the data that you accumulate. And so for Security Scorecard, the moat is all the historical interactions we've collected for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of companies who use our ratings and use our data to make safer, smarter decisions. So you kind of become a system of intelligence.
Alex, let's kind of take a step back and go to the very beginning. You've built this incredible company, and I'd like to sort of, if you can share what those KPIs look like today, what those key numbers look like today, how the company's performing, the size of the business. But before we break that down, I want to start to really go back to the beginning, because to build a great company, there's a lot of things to think about. I've had some incredible investors on the podcast who focus on, when they're thinking about investing, is this potential company going to displace a potential company or product that's already there, or is it going to create a new market? When you think about Security Scorecard, at the time of inception and pitching the idea to investors, was this displacing what was already there, or was it creating a completely new market?
The job to be done usually remains the same, right? Usually startups exist to go solve a pain point and come up with a better way of doing stuff. So for example, look, in the past, people would still have to go from their house to a friend's house. And before automobiles, maybe they would walk distances or they would ride a horse, but the job to be done would be the same, right? You had to travel a distance. Then Henry Ford came up with an idea of Model T, the first accessible automobile for the masses. And his innovation was not the fact that he priced it to be more affordable, or the fact that he came up with a mass assembly line, or the fact that he paid his workers higher salaries so they can actually afford to buy these automobiles. But he envisioned a whole transformation of the ecosystem of how people are going to use an automobile to travel distances before the time where the roads and the infrastructure existed. Now it's easy to imagine. You have paved roads, you have highways, you have tunnels, you have infrastructure. At the time it didn't exist and people didn't really drive distances. But he thought it would change. The job to be done remained the same. The job to be done was traveling, right? But the approach and the solution to the problem changed. So the same with Security Scorecard. Look, the job to be done is to assess risk of somebody you do business with. So in the past, people used 2 types of approaches to solve the problem. The first approach is an ostrich mentality. You just pretend the problem doesn't exist and you do nothing. The second approach is people would use pen and paper questionnaires. They would send you a questionnaire and say, for us, do you use an antivirus? Check. Do you have backups? Check. Okay, great. It sounds to me like you're doing a great job. Let's do business. let me send you my information. So it was a very manual, subjective approach driven by compliance. We said that it's crazy that if you drive a car, you know how fast you're driving. You go to a doctor, they measure your blood pressure. In cybersecurity, there were no KPIs whatsoever. So we had a dream that we're going to create a new industry that market did not exist of how you measure and quantify risk. And so initially, when we started talking to chief security officers and CIOs in 2013 with Sam, my business partner, and I, the reception we got was a little bit lukewarm. A lot of it people said, it's interesting. I don't know if it's going to work. That was actually an interesting lesson. If the idea is obvious to too many people, you're too late to the game. If everybody thinks it's a great idea, you're probably late to the game because other people would have done it. So you have to find this kind of like magic moment of how do you solve an existing pain point, and you basically solve a problem that people have. And at the same time, you don't do it at the time when it's obvious to too many people, right? So that's kind of the answer to the question.
I love that. I think it's like, nobody was asking for a faster horse, right? And then Henry Ford comes along and thinks of a new way of transporting people. Your business is quite interesting. It's like an Experian for businesses. It's like a credit rating system. If I was to go and take a mortgage to buy a house in Manhattan, the bank will check if I can afford it. If I, do I have bad credit? If I defaulted on payments. In this world, is there a risk of doing business with a company that you might lose a lot of data, especially pertaining to enterprise companies' customers? It's interesting. You said 9 out of 10 banks are currently using SecurityScorecard. Talk to me a little bit about the numbers.
Yeah, so we're used by 70% of the Fortune 100 companies who are a customer. We have over 3,000 paying customers and over 100,000 companies who claimed profiles on a platform. We operate in 46 different countries. We have customers in, all over the world, in Europe and Asia Pacific and US. We are a little bit under 500 employees, cash flow positive, growing rapidly, and, we're in the hundreds and hundreds of millions of revenue.
It kind of takes me on to a very different part of the conversation now. To get there, it takes a lot. You've got to build a team. You've got to think about the leadership, the culture. I recently had someone on the podcast, Arvind Sadani, who's the founder of Intel Capital. And I asked him, with all the investments that he had made at Intel Capital, what were the things that he looked for when he invested in founders? And he said, when he looked at the founders, they had to have real belief and passion for what they were building. But also the other thing that he looked for was, is this person going to inspire engineers? Are they going to inspire employees? Are they going to be able to convince customers to do business with them, right? There's so many different facets of how you think about the success of a business. But for you, when you look back at all these years of building SecurityScorecard, what have been the biggest lessons for you?
Well, there are so many lessons, and actually the lessons keep coming. They never really stop. Look, I think that early on, when you get your first customers before you're 2 million in revenue, you have to look for those visionaries, innovators who take a chance on you. They're going to know that your product is not fully baked, but they want to take a chance on you as a founder. So you have to find these innovators who want to transform how things are done. These early design partners, that's critical to go from 0 to 2. And a lot of the first customers are driven by word of mouth. I think that how you do storytelling and how you explain to people what you're trying to do and the vision for your company, it's very important. It needs to be founder-led. You need to explain to people why they should buy an automobile before the roads are paved. You need to paint a picture of how what used to be impossible is going to be possible. I would say one of the good decisions that we made early on is we invested a lot into tech product R&D, and we waited longer to hire sales and marketing talent, at least until like year number 2. And I think it was the right decision because too often companies start spending a lot of money on sales, marketing, and you start burning through investor capital before your product is really ready. We're really focused on deeply listening and understanding the pain point our customers have and trying to solve their problems, and only started investing into sales and marketing probably in year 2 when we were a little bit more established.
So that's interesting. So you're saying that the first year you didn't really think too much about the revenue. You really focused on understanding what you're building, working with the design partners, and that to you was more important than revenue in the first year.
Well, look, revenue was important, but I wanted to build the best product we could build. If you build a great product, then the revenue is going to follow. But no, we definitely focused on getting the early adopters. But in hindsight, I probably tried to go after too many customers. Like a lot of the time when you're early on, companies rush to do things as fast as possible, but it's a good approach, but you also need to put the right foundation in place for the architecture, for the product, for the infrastructure. I mean, I definitely would have spent more time on it if I were to redo it.
What changes would you have made?
I feel like we rushed to get the product to market, and then later we had to redo the architecture. We had to redo the product. It was painful because, after you reach a certain point, then all of a sudden you realize your technology does not scale and you have to like go back and rewrite it. And when you have hundreds of customers on it, it becomes more painful. I would have probably spent a little bit more time on architecture. I think the fact that we waited to hire sales and marketing talent, that was the right decision in the first couple of years. And then, the one thing we did that I would do again, we tried to hire people in New York so that you have this nexus team where you learn from each other, you absorb almost through osmosis, you create a culture. I really think that's very important for the early team to be together in the same location. We built a distributed company with people all over the world, and we made it a very distributed, easy to collaborate culture. But early on, we kept people in the same location, and I think this ability to be face-to-face and whiteboard and get a coffee together, I would do it all over again. I would not go do a distributed team if I were to redo the company.
Because you maintain that culture, right? People could learn from each other. You build a team that has a belief in the vision, but also I think there's another thing to really think about is what I've seen is when you build a remote culture, and it does work. There are companies that have done it very well. But I'm sure, what are your thoughts on building a remote culture and the risks related to that as far as retaining staff?
You have to get together in person, because if I show up 10 Zoom calls with you versus me spending 10 minutes in person, getting a coffee and just getting to know you as a person, you cannot replace that in-person component. So it's okay to have employees remote, but you need to get together in person. You need to build cohesion. If you do work with folks remote, work with people that you worked with before so that you can trust them. I think when the company is small, when you're 10, 15 people, communication happens through osmosis. You in the same room. Let's say that I'm a sales rep. I hang up the phone and say, oh man, I lost the deal. And Firas, you're an engineer. You look at me and you're like, hey, why do you lose the deal? And I tell you some features missing. You just go and build a feature, right? And so communication happens by osmosis, and a marketing person might overhear it and say, hey, Alex, Firas, since you guys are building a feature, I should probably write a pamphlet. When the company becomes much bigger, you have to create deliberate communication channels, because communication does not happen as easily. I would do that.
I 100%. I'm definitely in alignment with you on that. In terms of people hiring, design partners in the beginning, customers, investors, what would you say has been throughout this whole journey the most difficult part? Has it been the hiring? Was it the design partner piece? Was it getting to a point where you've got those early adopters? Has it been the investors? What's your biggest challenge?
It's always people, right? It's always people related, team related, hiring the team, motivating the team, because you have to kind of like balance, how do you push the team to do the impossible, to not burn the team out? How do you make sure that you kind of coach the team instead of micromanage, but at the same time, how do you maintain velocity? But I think that when you get amazing people who are low ego, that's very important, because you can hire somebody who's very brilliant, very smart, but toxic for the environment. That person is going to blame this person. This person is going to be more about me than the team. That's the hardest part. It's easy to separate with somebody who's underperforming. But the hard part has always been when you have like a brilliant performer, and then that person is doing amazing work, and then yet it creates a toxic environment where, other people are not good enough, or that person is not doing a good job. That's always been the hard part. How do you really drive the culture? And the culture is not just the values you put on the wall, but it's also positive and negative behaviors you exhibit. And look, I have plenty of positive and negative behaviors, right? For example, let's say you do it subconsciously, like you show up to every Zoom call 5 minutes late as a CEO of a company, and everybody looks at it and says, oh, he's a CEO of a company, he's busy. But you just created a culture where it's okay to be late to meetings with your colleagues, where you run around, where you overloaded yourself instead of being disciplined and being on time. So it's like a little subtle thing, right?
It's funny you say that. The standards are so important. I remember when I first started Harrison Clark 8.5 years ago, and I hired my first employee, and I would rush running to the train station, and my wife used to tell me, why'd you have to rush? Like, it's your company. But I said, I have to be there first, because if I walk in late, the standard, I've already set the standard low. It's you're working for the company. Just because it's your company, you're still working for a company. You've got to build that culture. And I definitely agree with what you're saying there.
The answer also, it's never your company, it's a customer's company. Because if a customer stop paying you money because you don't provide good service, then they can actually go fire you and you go out of business.
Yeah, that's how you get fired. They're the stakeholders. What is a good runway for a company that is making money? Let's not worry too much about investment from VCs, just generally cash in the bag. What is a good runway? Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? Is it 2 years? What's a good runway?
I think companies, just in general, scale subject due to 4 constraints. The first and most important is the market. Is the market needing your solution? Are they pulling on you or are you pushing it? You want the market to pull you. They need to want what you build. The second is the team. How fast can you build an amazing team to run as fast as possible? The third is unit economics. That comes later. Cost of acquisition, rule of 40, all the other stuff. To answer the question that you asked, the final and the fourth constraint is the cost of capital. If the capital is expensive, you're going to dilute yourself and other shareholders, and it's going to be very hard for you to raise capital. As a general rule of thumb, you want to have at least a year in the bank, okay? At least a year of cash burn in the bank. Why? You have to work backwards from your milestones. If you are a non-venture backed company, then that's fantastic. I mean, you probably should stay cash flow positive, and that's it. And you have infinite runway. That's kind of the best case possible. If you're a venture-backed company, you have to return money to your shareholders. So you have to ask yourself, what has been my previous valuation? How long would it take me to get to the next valuation, where I can either sell the company or raise capital or become independent? So if you assume that, usually it takes 3 to 4 months to raise the capital from investors, if you have a good business. If you have a bad business, you can't do anything, right? And it takes 3 to 4 months, and then let's assume you get a term sheet and it falls out. You want to have another run at it, so you kind of double it. So now you're at 6 to 8 months. So usually you want to start fundraising 6 to 8 months before you need the capital, because also if you really need the capital and you ask for people, you're not going to have the leverage because you're not negotiating from a strong suit. When you're raising a capital when you don't need it, that's basically how you get the best deal. But the answer is look, it all depends on your trajectory. There's a lot of nuances. So for example, at SecurityScorecard, we have a lot of investors knocking on our door saying, hey, I'd love to give you $100 million or $50 million, but we don't need the capital right now unless we do a huge acquisition or something like that. So why would I take the capital right now and create dilution for shareholders? It doesn't make sense unless you can pull off a big merger and then you can accelerate the value for all the shareholders even further. So that's kind of a bit of a long-winded response.
As far as funding is concerned, right, when you're thinking about that seed round, pre-seed, Series A, and the lines are getting slightly convoluted between a seed round and a Series A these days because of the nature of AI startups. But when we think of the different rounds of funding, is there a round of funding that is the most difficult one to attain?
I mean, so much depends on the type of a company you are, on your trajectory, on everything. I really think it all depends on how your company is doing.
Let's look back at SecurityScorecard. Which was there a round of funding that you found the most challenging?
For me personally, the seed funding was the hardest, right? The seed funding was the hardest because a lot of the investors that I talked to early on in 2013 did not understand enterprise software. So I spoke to a lot of investors who understood consumer and ad tech, but they weren't experts in enterprise software. So that means that you had to talk to a lot of people, and it was wasted effort because they didn't see the vision of what it could become. And then we were lucky enough to meet some great funds. For example, Richard Seawald from Evolution Equity, terrific investor. Evolution funded many top cybersecurity companies. We partnered with Richard and Bold Start Ventures with Ed, Sim, and Elliot Durbin, who just actually announced a $250 million seed fund. But both Ed, Elliot, Richard, they deeply understood enterprise software. And so it was just a lot of fun to work with them, to scale the company. They could provide a lot of advice of what it takes to go from 0 to 1, 1 to 2, just good people to work with deep expertise. And so, but until we met them, it took a lot of conversations with folks who do consumer and other type of stuff. Later stage, I would say, was easier. We partnered with folks like Sequoia Capital, Google Ventures in Series A, Series B, had fantastic relationship. Later at Series C, we partnered with Upal at NGP Capital, who's a terrific investor for later stage, but he's been a great advocate for the firm. We scaled the company together. So I really look at the type of investors you surround yourself. You have to ask, who would you want to invite to your house for barbecue on a weekend? Who are just good people to spend time with? Who is going to be able to give you tough feedback? You don't want people who just agree with you. You want people who are going to support you when times are tough and inject the pressure when things are going well, right? Like you want to really build it together. So the seed probably was a little bit harder because we just didn't know enough investors in security, and the others got easier. But for a lot of startups right now in this economy, I do think that I would argue that Series B is the hardest because, you do seed, you do a prototype, you get to 1 million, then you convince somebody to do Series A. And then when you need to get to Series B, you really want to go from like 1 to 3 or maybe 6 million in revenue. And a lot of people hit kind of like a plateau because you can just call the first 5, 10 customers, convince them to buy your product because they're friends or they believe in you. But then if you want to make it scalable, it becomes much harder.
Yeah, I always hear that, with a very good investor, it shouldn't be too difficult to get from 0 to 1 or 5 million in revenue because they can use their portfolio, they can use their connections, their Rolodex, and they can get good people in front of you. The difficult is that the scale is once you're kind of on your own and you have to go out and prove that this product is working and product market fit is a consistent journey, never ends. You're constantly having to think about the product and how you keep evolving. Over the journey of Security Scorecard, the pain points, right? We talked about what keeps you up at night when you think about the supply chain risk, but what keeps you up at night today as far as the company's concerned?
I think a good leader should always have low ego because when you have a high ego, you're going to be too stubborn and too set in your ideas. I have no problem admitting that I'm wrong multiple times a day. At the end of the day, as a CEO of a company, you're accountable for anything good or bad that happens. And, as the company scales, a lot of setbacks happen and a lot of good things happen. So you're constantly bombarded by, good and bad. And so you have to be resilient. You have to shake it off and just continue pushing forward, conveying confidence to the team. I think you have to be able to play chess and not checkers. In checkers, you extinguish the fire, but in chess, you extinguish the fire and ask, why did the fire erupt in the first place? So solve the problem strategically. I'm always paranoid. So there's a million things that worry me. There's a million things that make me anxious. I mean, I think it's always about how do you build the best product? How do you make sure that you remain nimble and agile as a company as you scale? How do you build a good culture? For example, at SecurityScorecard, there's always lots of work that we can do to be better. But, one proud moment for me is whenever somebody worked at SecurityScorecard and goes and starts their own startup. That means that they learned the good and the bad, and they decided to go do their own stuff. That always makes me proud. And we have over a dozen alumni of SecurityScorecard who created their own companies and raised millions of dollars from venture capital. So that always makes me very, very happy.
That alumni piece is pretty cool. To see those logo, that the Security Scorecard logo on a LinkedIn profile, and the next gig is a founder and they're doing well. That really is cool. When you think about the journey you've been through with the Security Scorecard, have there been moments when you've had to really just step away from the company and just you needed a break? It gets too stressful. There's a lot going on. And if you kept going forward, you're only going to do harm, no good. Has that happened to you?
Look, I think you always have to try to objectively kind of, there's a famous quote about Andy Grove, the former CEO of Intel, where he walked in through the revolving door and said, if the board brought in a new leadership, what would they do? And he said, we would exit the memory chip business. So look, it's very hard. It's very, very painful and very lonely to scale startups. Your leadership team never really understands the full macro picture as much as you do. You're the one bombarded with all the good and the bad. Look, yeah, I mean, every year for the past 11 years, there have been moments where I said, you know what, maybe I'm not fit for it. Maybe I should just go do something else. But I think having a network of other CEOs you can talk to, that's been very, very useful. When you talk to other CEOs at a similar scale and you bounce problems off of them and you ideate with them and you realize everybody's doing the same problems, I think that definitely helped quite a bit. I worked with a number of different executive coaches. I'm a big believer in coaching and mentorship. You look at our best tennis players in the world, like Novak Djokovic or other type of folks. They have a coach. not because they're bad tennis players, but because they want to be the best that they can be. So, like, I'm a really big believer in working with coaches. I'm a big believer of having a network of other CEOs and trusted folks that you can talk to. I think that's what usually helps you get through the hard moments.
And you do have a co-founder, Alex.
Yes, Sam is my co-founder, and he's still with the company, and we're still friends, and he's still involved. And we started Security Scorecard together because we used to work at Guild Group together, and we wanted to solve this big problem. We also just wanted to work together and solve problems, and we're still doing it 11 years later.
There are many companies that start as co-founders, and many do stay together. What does it take? Because it's like a marriage in many ways. Having a co-founder, you're building something together. You're not alone, right? You do have a co-founder. What does it take to maintain that partnership?
It takes a lot of trust. It takes communication. It takes ability to express when you are happy or angry or frustrated and fight it out, talk it out, but then agree that you're going to still work on it. But I think it all starts with mutual trust and respect for each other. That's the foundation of anything. Because if you know that I have your back and you have my back, just we want each other to succeed as people, then anything else is solvable.
Alex, I want to wrap up this show today with one final question. A tradition we have on this show is asking our guests to recommend a book. Now, I'm an avid reader. I love reading, and Inside the Silicon Mind podcast is a podcast that's centered around showcasing to our listeners and our viewers what it takes to build amazing companies. Not just the positives, but also the negatives, the failures. As you know, we have founders, we have CEOs, CTOs, and investors on the show, and they've all come on the show with a different recommendation, a book that has truly resonated with them. Now, I know you told me in our call prior to recording this episode that you are also somebody that is an avid reader. So I'm sure you have many books at your disposal that you've read. But what would you say is the most profound book, one that has truly resonated with you, that you would recommend to any founder today?
I really like the book that I read last year. It's called The Secret Lives of Customers by David Duncan. And this book is about a fictional coffee shop chain that's preparing to go public and file for an IPO. And they notice that the revenues are plummeting. And so they hire this undercover detective to go interview customers in a coffee shop to understand what's going on. The question that this person asks the leadership team is, why do you hire a cup of coffee? And the answer is, it's not just to quench the thirst or because you need more caffeine. But if you go to people in a coffee shop and you ask them, different people hire a cup of coffee, pay money, so you hire it for different reasons. Some people might be waiting for their kids' soccer game to finish. Other people might be meeting their friends after work. Another person might be a salesperson and you need a place in between meetings to go and catch up on work. So depending on why you hire a cup of coffee, you provide service in a different way. So you don't just compete with other coffee shops by making better coffee, but for example, if your clientele is soccer moms, you might come up with community groups where you can meet in this coffee shop and you do community groups for local parents. But that was a really profound book because a lot of the time companies are so fixated on building a product, but they don't zoom out and ask a question, why do our customers hire us? Like, what's the job to be done by our customers? And so I really highly recommend this book. I gave it to my entire product management team, to my executive team. I quite loved it.
That's a great one. And since you are an avid reader, I'm going to ask you for a second book. I haven't asked anyone for a second book, by the way, but I'm going to ask you for a second book. I've really enjoyed this show. Besides the business world, from the perspective of thinking about your customers, do you also read books that are focused on the psychology of selling, of building that mental capacity to consistently push the boundaries, that grit, that relentless mindset? One book that truly resonates with me that I love reading, I have all my sales staff read, is Relentless by Tim Grover. And for me, that's an important book because it teaches the kind of mindset that's required to be successful. I'd love to know if you have in your library a book that you've read that kind of falls in that category.
I do quite like the book called The Inner Game of Tennis. Even though it talks about tennis, I think it's really applicable to how do you overcome self-doubt, nervousness that prevent you from winning. So I think a lot of it is applicable to business. For example, in this book, they mention how, let's say you're playing with a friend. Let's say we're playing tennis with each other and you're just playing so good. You're crushing it. Now you get a break. You're taking a break, and in the middle of a break, I come over to you and say, Firas, I feel like you're crushing it today. What are you doing different? Like, I couldn't help but notice you playing tennis so well. What are you doing different? Like, that's going to completely throw you off your game, because a lot of the time when you ask people to articulate what's different when you're in the zone, that makes them go from unconscious to start thinking, and that's like a way to throw you off the game. So it was like very interesting about the stop zone, peak performance. So I do like that book quite a bit.
I'm definitely going to read that book, because I think when I think about what you just said there, it makes me think of performers that I've worked with who have done exceptionally well, and I'm sure you've seen them as well in your company, but all of a sudden they plateau. Is that a common thing in engineering, where you have engineers who are doing super, super well and then they just plateau? They're not performing as well as they were before.
It happens, not just with engineers, but actually with anybody, with sellers, with anyone. It happens all the time, and then you need to figure out a way of how to reignite that passion within them. It happens for me, it happens for others. So I think the true hard part about the leadership is, how do you ignite the passion in people's hearts? How do you ignite the fire in people's hearts and not just under their butts, right? Like, that's the hard part, right? And very hard.
Alex, it was an absolute pleasure. And I wish we had more time, because I'd love to keep you on and ask you many questions. I think we'll, if it's okay with you, I'd love to have you on the show again to unpack that second topic, the leadership, the growth, because that's a talking topic in itself. And you were a testament to achieving that with Security Scorecard. Again, Alex, thank you so much for the recommendation of the books and everything I've learned today on the show. I'm sure our listeners are truly going to enjoy this episode, and hopefully we can have you on here again.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Alex. This podcast was brought to you by Serrana Labs and powered by Harrison Clark. At Harrison Clark, we're at the heart of Silicon Valley's evolution and at the intersection of search and venture, funding the companies shaping the future and connecting them to the most elite cloud, data, and AI talent. To learn more, visit harrisonclark.com. If today's episode challenged your thinking, then share it with someone who's driving innovation. For even more insights on achieving product market fit, subscribe to our newsletter, The PMF Playbook, where we break down the journey from zero to product market fit. Visit thepmfplaybook.com. For more episodes, follow us on social media or visit InsideTheSiliconMind.com. Until next time, stay curious, stay consistent, and stay inside the Silicon Mind. See you soon.